Hello there, this is Bradley, and you're listening to Psych Everywhere, a podcast by Psychi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. For this show, distinguished guests weigh in on applying psychological science to a diverse range of current events and to better your life. This episode was made possible through a special Psychi sponsorship with CSPP Alliant International University. If you'd like to learn about graduate programs at CSPP, be sure to check out the link in the show notes for this episode. Would you prefer to read along as you listen? A written transcript is available. See the link in the show notes for this episode. I'm excited to introduce you to Dr. Monique Levermore, a new full professor in the Clinical Psychology PhD program at CSPP. Dr. Levermore is the founder of the Levermore Psychological Services, which has several offices in Florida and partners with state agencies to serve underserved and marginalized children and adults. She earned her PhD at Howard University, and she's taught the psychology of diversity and multicultural psychology courses for decades. She's been involved in Title IX diversity workshop development and training master's and doctoral students with regard to multicultural competence. I thought, hey, she is the perfect person to help listeners or readers. I don't want to forget the readers, but she's the perfect person to help you assess your own multicultural competence. Dr. Levermore, I'm really excited to welcome you to Psych Everywhere.
Thank you.
So, to kind of get us started, do you think that people are as multiculturally competent as they think they are?
The short answer is no. And that's because it takes a little bit of effort to become multiculturally competent.
So how would a person then assess their competence and identify areas where they need to improve?
If we're thinking about a lay person, it would be different than someone who's studying psychology. But generally speaking, if they have little to no casual contact with diverse groups, and they tend to coalesce among people that are similar to them, then they really don't have the opportunity to interact with many different kinds of people. And they really have to question whether or not they are multiculturally competent, whether or not they're competent to provide services then to people who are different.
Could you share any particular areas with regard to race or gender, religion or anything really, where people tend to have the least knowledge?
I really believe that people have the least amount of knowledge when it comes to diversity groups that focus on people of varying abilities. So whether that's varying cognitive abilities, whether someone may have some cognitive deficits, or whether or not someone may be intellectually gifted, or physical abilities that vary, meaning that individuals who may have differences with regard to how they physically interact with other people around them or in society. For example, I did a lot of work with an organization called Division of Blind Services, which is federally funded in many different states. And I find that the training that you receive in master's level psychological education programs or doctoral level programs doesn't really provide a lot of information about working with groups like that, individuals who are served by Division of Blind Services, where they may have low vision or they may be completely blind.
Most people who listen to this conversation, I'm going to guess that they probably care about their multicultural competence because they're listening. But, on the other hand, do you have any tips for getting people who are less receptive to these messages? Do you have any tips to get those people to care and improve as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that most people who are listening are interested in these areas. However, I think that all people need to kind of have an honest conversation about themselves with regard to their own worldview and how their worldview differs from people who have other types of worldviews. A conversation with themselves about their awareness of their own personal bias, their knowledge about other groups, and the genuine contact that they have with people from all different types of groups. I think that with regard to tips for people who may be less receptive, they need to know that it really does enhance your life when you have contact with many different kinds of people over your lifetime, especially in the field of psychology, where we have an interest in human behavior and kind of unlocking the puzzle of humanity. Shouldn't we try to get to know who people are at their core and who we are at their core? I think that that is a way that you can kind of engage people who may not think that this is an important area of study.
How do you navigate that balance between acknowledging cultural diversity and avoiding stereotypes, though, and generalizations in psychology training?
Mhm. I think that everything about the guidance that we have received in order to train individuals in studying psychology at the undergraduate, master's, and doctoral level has everything to do with a focus on individual differences and also similarities. It's important to know that no one group is a monolith and that we have to look at the fact that there are individual differences within groups. So we don't want to focus on stereotypes and things like that. It's important, however, to also know, to have some knowledge of cultures, of the norms that bind different groups. And it's best to get that kind of information by interacting with different types of groups of people, with people who have different worldviews, different perspectives. And that just, I think, makes someone who wants to study in this field a more well-rounded individual.
Do you have any tips for ensuring that discussions about diversity and inclusion are respectful and inclusive and, beneficial within an academic setting?
Yeah, it is difficult to talk about topics that push buttons.
Yeah.
Um, I think that it's important that when you're talking about diversity and inclusion and equity types of issues, that you use the general ground rules that we would use for any crucial conversation. So we're thinking about ground rules for crucial conversations, conflict resolution, making sure that people feel heard and that there's like a healthy respect for like another person's point of view. Those are all factors that are really important when you're talking about topics that are close to someone's heart. And usually when you're talking about diversity, inclusion, equity, multiculturalism, these are topics that are really close to people's hearts.
I know you've taught a lot of classes on diversity and multiculturalism and competence. I wondered, could you share any activities or like what kinds of things that the students learn in these classes?
Yes, I think that the best diversity courses or multicultural psychotherapy courses involve a lot of activities. I think that the more you can get individuals to kind of engage with people who are very different than they are, then the more they kind of realize, oh, well, this person's kind of different, but they're also kind of the same. And they're able to kind of find the commonalities that allow them to hear where the person's coming from and then develop empathy for that person. One of the things I like a lot is the human library. So there is a library that exists online where you can go and talk to individuals who are completely different than you and learn about like how they've walked their journey through life, learn about their particular worldview, and it just exposes people in a way that they may not have been exposed before. That's one of the activities that I enjoy doing in class. Another one is having students watch foreign films. Foreign films are fascinating because they expose students to different dialects and different accents. They have to actually concentrate on trying to hear where the person's coming from. They also get a different perspective on the world and on society from the director of the film, from the way they choose to do things in a different way than we might do in the United States of America. And so I think that looking at foreign films and kind of getting a sense of cultures from film is a very helpful activity in a multicultural class as well.
I think a newer topic that's been kind of building lately is intersectionality. What should people know about intersectionality and how that relates to multiculturalism?
I think they should know that human beings are complicated, they're complex. And intersectionality is a really unique concept in that it helps us to understand the unique combinations that form human beings and like how those unique combinations have an impact on how they travel through the world, how they navigate situations with other individuals. And so I think that intersectionality is something that people may be afraid of, but I think that it's something that they should embrace because they should recognize that human beings are complex. It's not easy to have an understanding of who someone is, because you have to look at the many different layers that make up that person.
How can one measure the effectiveness of diversity type training?
We have tried very hard in the field of psychology to try to figure out how to assess whether or not someone is culturally competent, whether they're getting what they need to get out of diversity training. And really, I think that the easiest way to answer that is to note that we spend a lot of time with self-reflection activities, self-reflection exercises, helping the person to kind of like ask themselves the questions about whether or not they are aware of their own bias, whether or not they are aware of uh, norms of other cultures, and what may be normal in one diversity group that doesn't seem to be normal in another diversity group, and having some understanding for that and some acceptance of that. And so I think the best way to kind of measure it is to continue with self-reflection throughout the process so that the person gets to a place where they're actually able to assess for themselves, oh, I think I did a really good job at understanding this particular group, but I think I have a ways to go with having an understanding of this other group.
Are there particular challenges to promoting multicultural competence in education, and how might these things be overcome?
There are significant challenges. And I really think at the core of the challenges that multicultural competence in education are facing at this moment in time, the core is fear. The core is fear of diversity. It's fear of inclusion. It's fear of what that might mean for the future. And I think that interacting with as many different groups as you possibly can and recognizing that we're all just human is a way at combating that fear. That the more opportunities that you have to kind of navigate your journey with people who are different from you will help to like allay those fears and help you to recognize that there is value in diversity in human behavior, in human interaction, and in human biology. We can look to biology to see that diversity is valuable and it's important. And so I really think that that's the way that you can overcome it by interacting with other individuals.
How did you become interested in these topics?
I think that because I come from a particular diversity group, it was just natural for me to become interested in these topics. But I think also psychology has had like a weird relationship with like understanding that multiculturalism was important. And I think that over the course of my training in psychology over time, it was just really nice to see psychology embrace the fact that diversity has value. And and I think that I wanted to be at the forefront of all of that. I wanted to help students in their training to understand that if they become multiculturally competent, they will be better clinicians and they'll be able to serve the diverse groups of individuals that need help from us.
Have your views on multiculturalism changed any over the years, maybe?
I think that if I said no, it hadn't changed, it would mean that I'm not a lifelong learner, and I and I see myself as a lifelong learner who tries to make an effort to try to figure out, oh, how can I look at things differently, and how can I learn more about any particular topic area? So, I think it has changed over the years and become more the focal point of what I do. Um, I work with individuals in clinical psychology, in forensic psychology, but all of that really has at its core working with diverse groups of people and understanding their point of view and their worldview and what motivates them to engage in the behaviors that they engage in. And so I think that I have become more intentional about incorporating what I know about multicultural competence in the work that I do with individuals and in the consulting that I do with either organizations or state and local agencies.
Are there any measures or activities or anything that people could do to sort of assess where they stand multicultural competence-wise?
Well, we have several psychologists who have been involved in really fantastic research with regard to multicultural competence. And when I think of multicultural competence, I think of Sue and Sue. So, Sue's research was really about making sure that when we're thinking about how to assess competence, multicultural competence in particular, we need to help people to have an honest conversation with themselves about their awareness of their own stuff, their awareness of where they sit with regard to diverse groups. Do they have cultural humility where they're able to kind of sit and say, okay, well, I don't know a lot about this particular group of people and I want to find out more. Sue and Sue's work also talked about a need for us to think about what knowledge we have available to us about other groups, whether or not we have research available to us that can guide us with information about other groups, whether or not we have access to individuals from other groups so that we can have more and more information. And so being able to assess whether or not you're competent has to do with trying to figure out, are you aware of these different things? Do you have knowledge in these different areas? Is there bias that you are working on to try to figure out where you are with regard to bias to make sure that you're not having an adverse impact on different groups that you might serve? And so those are the ways that people can kind of assess, where am I and where am I going with regard to all of this so that I can get on the road to become more multiculturally competent.
Okay, last question. What changes regarding multiculturalism would you like to see for the future?
I'm really future focused right now. And I'm a late stage psychologist and I'm kind of well, what's going to happen in the next 10 years and what's going to happen in the next 20 years that we need to prepare students in training for so that they can be effective with the clients that they'll see 10 years, 20 years from now. And so I really believe that we need to take a look at the role of technology in psychology, and particularly what sorts of cultural bias are built into the technologies that we'll have for the future when we're providing services to clients or when we're doing even research in psychology. How will the bias that's built into technology have an impact on that? And I think that it's going to take a lot of individuals getting together to kind of think through how we can make technology less biased so that it will not harm the individuals that we want to serve very effectively and very ethically in this field.
Well, I just want to thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I think it's a really great conversation, an important one. And it takes the conversations in the past episodes we've had, I think, sort of to the next level, which is exciting that whenever I promote one of these episodes on one of these topics about communicating and culturalism and things like that, I can promote the others as well. We're sort of starting to build our own little library of sorts on these topics. So that's really exciting. I think this is a very important addition to it. And yeah, I just thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. It was an honor to be a part of the show.
You've just listened to another episode of Psych Everywhere. This episode was made possible through a PsyChi sponsorship with the Alliant International University, California School of Professional Psychology. That's CSPP. Founded in 1969, CSPP was one of the nation's first independent schools of professional psychology. Today, CSPP continues its commitment to preparing the next generation of mental health professionals and advocates. Their dedication to ensuring every community's access to quality mental health care extends from integrated care to inclusive family therapy. Explore their programs at https://info.alliant.edu/partner-psychi. And of course, I'll put a link in the show notes for that as well. Would you like to increase your multicultural competence through Psychi resources? Be sure to check out Psychi's Diversity Matters online resource. It contains helpful articles, activities for your classes, chapters, and communities, and more. I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. If you haven't already subscribed to Psych Everywhere, go ahead and follow us wherever you go for podcasts. Tell a friend or a colleague about the show. Word of mouth is a huge help for podcasts. So share what you learned at the dinner table or in your classes. You can also follow us on Twitter at Psychi Podcast and leave a review at Apple Podcast or wherever you go for podcasts. You'll absolutely make my day. And more importantly, you'll be helping us to get Psych everywhere. Okay, that's all for now. I'll connect with you again soon. Copyright 2024, Psychi, the International Honor Society in Psychology. All rights reserved.